morning and welcome to the Doctor's In. This is our second program and we're really excited about doing something that we think is going to be very interesting this morning. And let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Marcia Boyles, and my partner in this program is Dr. Sethi, who is one of the primary providers over at the Green Spring Medical Center.
That's right. Thank you, Marcia.
Good morning, Dr. Sethi. We're delighted to this morning be talking about two subjects that I think our folks are going to find very interesting, and that is muscles and bones.
Yes,
since
indeed.
we all have them.
Yes, yes, indeed. And it's very important, really, to reflect on them because both of these account for the mobility that we have. That's
Or
how we
don't
walk.
have.
Or don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's right.
Yes, which are you going to start with?
So let's talk about muscles first.
Mm-hmm.
So muscles are instrumental in us moving around. They are what lend us mobility. So what happens to our muscles is that as we age, our muscle mass begins to decline. It's kind of shocking that muscle mass begins to decline after the age of 30. And it may drop by as much as 3 to 5% for each decade. So if you go from 30 to 60, for instance, muscle mass may drop by 10 to 15%. It may not necessarily do so, but it can.
And I think we're certainly not aware of that in our 30s, 40s, 50s.
That's correct. That's correct. But if you look at your clothing, you look at your jackets in particular, you'll notice that the fit of the shoulders changes, and that's in part because of the reduction in muscle mass. Now, what happens after age 60, 65? So between 65 and 75, and these are approximations, not precise, the rate of reduction in muscle mass may be much greater. So not only is it 5% for each decade, it may actually go up. And so this has a bearing on what I call the 3 F's for muscles. When our muscles are not working as well because the muscle mass is reduced, we have frailty, we have falls, and we have fractures. And we're all familiar with those at Green Spring.
So it's the actual size and strength of the muscle.
That is correct. And so the imperative is to understand why is that happening and what can we do about it. So we have a catch-22 here, and it goes like this. The muscle mass drops, and as muscle mass drops, we begin to feel less strong or weaker. The commonest complaint I hear from folks is, I don't have energy, I don't feel strong enough to do the things I was doing before. So when you feel weak or you feel less strong, you're less likely to do things physically that you were doing before. So let's say if you were walking 2 miles a day or you were walking for 45 minutes a day, you may not feel like walking. So the reduction in muscle mass is making you less strong, more weak, and so you reduce your activity. The more you reduce physical activity, the greater reduction there is in muscle mass. And so you've got reduction in muscle mass causing weakness and loss of strength preventing you from exercising, and the lack of exercise or a more sedentary lifestyle causing more muscle mass.
You know,
so
I think
we must interrupt this cycle.
I hear what you're saying, and let's talk more about that. I think most of us would think of this as sort of a psychological thing, that we're just feeling lazy.
Yes,
and don't really associate it with the actual
correct.
Physiological change.
Yes, so the physiology of the muscles with aging is there's a reduction in muscle mass. And so what can we do about it? So I'm going to summate it in 2 words. Everybody has to have an exercise plan. The only way you can stem the tide is to ensure that you have an exercise plan. And if you couple that with good nutrition, then you've done what you can do to maintain muscle mass as well as possible over time. So what should the exercise plan be? What do we need to do?
Now, let me stop and
Okay.
ask you a question.
Sure.
Is this, if we have lost a tremendous amount of our muscle mass and strength, is it reversible? Can we actually
Yes.
change?
Yes, so it is reversible to a degree. So if you start exercising and you have this exercise plan, which we'll talk more about in a moment, and you couple that with good nutrition, and the nutrition component is very easy, so maybe we'll address that first. So as we lose muscle mass, we lose the ability to use proteins for energy. But once you start exercising, within a period of as much as or as little as 2 weeks, you can begin to improve that process. So you can now begin to convert protein into energy much more efficiently than when you had lost the muscle mass and you were not exercising. So of course there are many sources of energy, but protein is at least one of them. So one thing I do know about the residents at Green Spring, and that is that their protein intake is good because everybody's eating a very good dinner.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the reasons that in spite of all the medical problems, our residents enjoy relatively good health. We also have the tools, or should I say the facilities, for everyone to have an exercise plan.
Yes.
So what should that consist of? That's got to consist of weight-bearing exercise. So what's the best thing for that? Walking. Everybody at Green Spring walks. It's constructed in such a way that
Well, not everybody, but most.
most. The ability to walk is very easy. You don't have to step outside of the halls.
Right.
Inclement weather doesn't affect it. So what constitutes an appropriate amount of walking daily? It's about 30 minutes daily. And
About 30 minutes?
30 minutes daily. So please do consider walking in your apartment as being a good thing, but do not consider that as being enough, because you're awake many hours and you may think, oh well, I'm walking around all day in my apartment and that's sufficient. It is not. So what matters is when you've got sustained exercise. So if you can do those 30 minutes, you can break it up. You don't have to do 30 minutes at one time because that may not be feasible. But you can do 10 minutes. So if you can do 10 minutes and you can do it 3 times a day, you'll have your 30 minutes. And the benefits of exercise go way beyond helping your bones and muscles and joints. They affect your overall health. They affect your cardiovascular health. So,
And your mood.
absolutely, absolutely. So that walking is a very good thing to do because that is allowing you to weight bear and help improve your muscles, retain muscle mass, build muscle mass, and help improve your bones as well. The second type of exercise we need is strengthening exercises, and I know that those who go to the gym are familiar with them. But even if you don't go to the gym, they're easy to do. So I'm going to tell you a little snippet from when my children were young, and my older son loved to wrestle, and the younger and the older one would be trying to lift weights. So they'd be lifting these big weights, and they would see mom with these 2-pound weights, and they'd say, aha, there's mom with her ketchup bottles. So I say that facetiously, but you know, it's very easy to have those around. And if your gait is good, you can even walk with those weights in your hands. So you can accomplish 2 things at one time. And then of course, you know, they give you the bands and you can use those as well. So those are the 2 types of exercises that we must have. In addition, and we'll talk about this more when we get to bones, balance exercises are always good. I know Green Spring offers a balance class, which is good for everybody to take. And so the exercise plan, if there's one takeaway from this, it should be, do you have an exercise plan? And if not, please consider having one that will include walking, some resistance training with weights, and eating a good nutritious diet, which I know that everybody does for dinner, and so I think that base is easily covered.
All right. We should also say that probably our next program, we're thinking about doing it on exercise.
Yes, and I thought that would be a good way, as we discussed, So this is sort of the meat and bones, so to speak, of what we should do.
No pun intended.
No pun intended.
Right.
With bones and muscles. And then the next part would be the practicum, so that we could talk a little bit more specifically about the exercises. And we'll have the folks from the fitness center and others that we're hoping to invite who will come and be able to do sort of a demo for us.
All right. Well, I think this was a very helpful overview. When you said 30 minutes walking, that in addition then to other exercising, and are you thinking about maybe an hour of exercise a day total? Is that sort of what your objective would be?
I would stick to the 30 minutes of walking because I'm trying to establish a minimalist standard.
Okay.
Anything above that
right.
is good. And anything that you can do that is longer than 10 minutes at a time is very beneficial. When you exceed that 30 minutes is when you get the biggest bang for your buck.
Okay. All right. Well, I think the idea of an exercise plan is a terrific one, and those of us who have used the outpatient rehab folks often come out with a plan.
Right.
But I think there are probably many folks who haven't really thought too much about that.
Yes.
So that's very helpful.
I would also say, in closing the subject of muscles, revisit your exercise plan every 6 months to see if you've fallen off the bandwagon. It's sort of a checking in with your own self.
Okay, all right. The very fact that the weaker we feel, the less we're going to do, I think is a really good, I think it's a really good impetus to reevaluate where we are with things.
Absolutely.
All right, that's helpful. All right, now we're going to talk about bones.
Right. So when we think about bones, we generally think of them as these structures, which form the framework for our body, and of course they do. But bones are not static. There's a couple things that I want to leave everybody with today. Think of the bones as not just being supporting structures. The bones are actually an organ system. And so bones, cartilage, wherever bones come together, we form a joint. That's how we move. If we had rigid bones and we didn't have joints, we would have no mobility whatsoever. So all of these together constitute what we call an organ system. So bones are very dynamic.
So these are living tissue.
They are living tissues. And the bones perform many important functions for us. And we don't consciously think of bones in that way. We just think of them at this stage as, particularly as we get older, as things that are likely to be involved if we have a fall and break. But what's behind that? What else are our bones doing? So the bones perform a very major function for us in terms of producing red blood cells. The long bones, the marrow of the long bones produce.
All right, now we have to remember the structure of the bone, that there is the outside and the inside.
That's correct.
And so it's the inside where all this new cell production is going.
So this is where that cell production is occurring, and there's chiefly two kinds of cells. There's the red blood cells, what gives your skin the color, the redness. So the red cells, when they are low, is what is called anemia. Everybody's familiar with that word. And then they make the WBCs, or the white blood cells. And the white blood cells are what help us fight infection. So the one function is to produce these cells, which is vital to living.
We don't think about the fact that the red and white blood cells are produced by the bone.
Yeah.
I think that probably most folks don't know that.
Yes. So the second function, which is a critical one for our bodies, is that these are the mineral depots of the body. This is where we store our calcium. So more than almost 99% of the calcium in the body is stored in the bones. A little bit is in the teeth, but the vast majority of that 99%, 98%, whatever number, is actually stored in the bones. So part of, and we'll address this later as we go on, as we age, is that the mineral content gets depleted, which makes the bones weak. So these are the mineral depots of the body. They store other minerals as well. There's phosphorus, there's magnesium, but for today we're just going to speak about calcium chiefly, because that's the imperative as we talk about bones.
All right, is the calcium stored as part of the structure of the bone?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So in other words, it's not like a salt depot that is just stored. Yes, yes. But it can be mobilized if it needs to, and if it's mobilized too much, then we can have problems in the bone itself, obviously, because the bone gets demineralized, right? So the third function of the bones is that they protect some very important organs in our body. So think of your brain, it's protected by the skull. How susceptible we would be to bad injuries, brain injuries. Think of all those football players, helmets and all, and the injuries that they could sustain. And then the rib cage. The rib cage protects the heart, it protects the lungs. So when somebody falls and they fracture a rib, what's the biggest risk to them? Of course, they'll have pain, but more than that, the rib can poke into the lung and make a hole. So normally they're protecting the heart and the lungs. So they have that protective function. But the one that we are most concerned about is how the bones help us move. As I said, we can't think of the bones in isolation. A bone by itself cannot move. But if you think of the bones as an organ system, and you think of the bones, so two sets of bones. Let's just think of the knee, for instance. So the knee is sort of like this. So there are two bones coming together, and in between is cartilage and fluid. But where these come together, we form a joint. Now, we couldn't form a joint if we didn't have muscles. The muscles will be what will connect the two bones, muscles, ligaments. Strictly, muscles don't connect one bone to another, but within the bone, they will be connecting to different places. Think of your shoulder. You've got a muscle here, which is attaching up here to another bone. That's how you move your shoulder. So they help you move. They help you move three-dimensional. We don't think of movement in that way, but it is really 3D, you know, how you move. And it depends on the type of joint. Some where you have much more movement, such as the shoulders, and others where you have less movement, such as the knees. So those are the four major functions that the bones perform for us.
All right. Now, again, what is happening as we age?
Right. So the bones, because they're a dynamic organ, they're constantly undergoing what we call remodeling. So remodeling just simply means that the bones have a normal process where new bone is being formed and old bone is being resorbed. This goes on very actively until age 21, and there's a good balance. So this is the amount, let's say this is the amount of bone we've formed, this is the amount of bone we've resorbed, so the balance is equal. But as we get older, with each decade that passes, if things remain just the way they are, the amount of bone that's being formed is less, and the amount of bone that is being resorbed is increased. So when the amount of bone that is being resorbed increases, then we've got a reduction in bone mass. So a reduction in bone mass.
So it's bone density.
Yes. Well, reduction in bone density means the mineral content has gone down. But reduction in bone mass means, let's say, if you had this much bone,
the actual size.
The actual size goes down.
It does?
Yes, it does.
I didn't know that.
Yes, actual size goes down. I'm sure you've heard, I've had people come and tell me I've become 6 inches shorter. That's extreme, but many people have lost height.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've all lost some.
Yes, yes, yes. And so the bones play a very important
now, are
part
these is the reduction in height the long bones decreasing in size?
So
legs?
So let's talk about which are the bones that are being affected. And I want to approach this by talking about first, when we see each other, what do we see? We see posture. right? So when we look at the posture, we see those who are standing straight and those who can't stand very straight. They may be bent over. And the reason for that principally is that the vertebra, these are the bones that form the backbone, that the bone mass is actually reduced. And so when you get, so let's say if a vertebra is this thick, now it's become this thick. So what's going to happen to this difference? This is hypothetical. So what's going to happen to this difference, and what is this going to do? It's going to reduce your height.
Sure.
And how much reduction in height you get depends on how much reduction you have in bone mass. So that's the one thing that's happening. The second thing that's happening is that the discs, these are the cushions between the two vertebrae, the discs, these begin to lose volume as well.
Now that's cartilage.
Yes, that's not bone, but that's what is between the bones, because if that were not there, you wouldn't be able to move at all. That's what happens when you get arthritis, for instance. So these begin to lose volume and lose fluid, and so you get further shrinking of the spine. So this leads to poor posture and folks being bent over. So what does this poor posture and being bent over do to you? Observationally, this alters your gait, how you walk.
Sure.
You become unstable. And when you become unstable and your balance is not good, you're going to fall. When you fall, what's going to happen? If you've got reduction in bone mass and reduction in mineral content, you may sustain a fracture, right? So for women, this is a particular issue.
More so than men.
More so than men, and this is because of changes in hormones. After menopause, women's need for calcium actually goes up, and calcium is needed more than ever to maintain the mineral content of the bones. And so hip fractures, for instance, are very common, and hip fractures can be life-changing because of all of the events that can be associated with it. Not forgetting, mobility and sort of developing a more sedentary lifestyle. Once you fall, there's greater risk of a fall if you don't preempt what's causing that problem in the first place. So this probably is a good segue into can anything be done? What can we do? And how can we find out what is the status of our bones? So there are two things. We talked about the one component, which is the observation, which is look at yourself in the mirror. Are you standing straight? And if your posture is not good, then observationally you know.
And you're unable to
Yes,
straighten.
and you're unable to, not because you don't want to, but there's also an awareness issue. I often ask folks when they come in, particularly when they're new or if there's been some change in their condition, to have them stand up and walk. Clearly, everybody becomes more self-conscious because they know someone is watching, but it's also a good opportunity to observe the posture and say, well, can you pull your shoulders back? Because when you pull your shoulders back, you automatically tend to straighten up, and you become more aware. So the awareness is very important. But unlike muscle, where we cannot measure precisely the degree of muscle loss, here we do have a tool, and it's called the bone density test, or the DEXA for short. And so when we do this test, we establish what is called a T-score, and the T-score will be described as a number, and it'll say it's either plus or it'll be minus. So if you have a minus score, which is less than 1.0, then your bones are probably in reasonably good shape. Okay. If your T-score is -1 to excuse me, -2.5, then you have what is called osteopenia. And the most severe degree of loss and demineralization would be osteoporosis, which would be a score higher than -2.5. So the numbers are staggering in terms of folks with osteoporosis. So we have roughly 10 million people who have osteoporosis, which is the most severe form, and roughly 15% of these individuals, 1.5 million, will have a fracture every year.
What percentage of folks, let's say 85 and above, are going to have either osteopenia or osteoporosis?
The number is actually very high. It would be nice to have precise data to tell you, okay, this is the number.
Right.
But I think that you should assume that the vast majority will have some change. And when you see, or you see your physician and you've noticed changes in your posture or inability to straighten up, please ask for a bone density evaluation.
How often do you recommend bone density tests?
So it can be done as a screening if one wants. I would say above the age of 65, or if you have a family history of osteoporosis, or if you've been taking a medication, a high dose of steroids, for instance. You should do it every 2 years if it's abnormal. And if it is normal, then that period of time can be stretched out.
All right, I see we're down to the last minute or two here. So you're suggesting that we all need to know our T-score?
Know your T-score. And then, in addition to that, we are now going to go back to what we said, what can we do to prevent this? Exercise and more exercise. Okay, that's one. And the exercise, again, has 3 components. It's got the weight bearing, that's walking. It's got the resistance exercises, the weightlifting, and balance. And then you need to supplement this with a good calcium intake. 1,200 milligrams of calcium every day. And there are other drug therapies that we may employ if we find that there is osteoporosis and it's worsening.
Right, right. All right. Wow. You know, I don't think many of us know what our T-score is. And so this is a good reminder of, if you don't know and you haven't had a bone density test for years, this would be a good time to think about talking to your primary and getting one.
I think it would be very good. In fact, this may be even more important than thinking about your heart. Knowing your T-score number may be more important than knowing about your cholesterol.
Okay.
Because the risk of a fall is probably the greatest
Oh, I
risk.
was going to say, there are certainly some life-changing implications to bone loss.
Yes, there are.
In every sense of the word.
Yep, and we see them every day as we see folks around. You can see them with a new eye now.
All right. Well, Dr. Sethi, I can't tell you how helpful I am finding this, and I think our other residents will as well. Again, we should tell folks that if they have things in which they're interested, and we have actually heard some topics from residents, they need to let us know, because we're always open to new ideas. Can you think of anything else that we need to leave with here?
Exercise plan, T-score, and exercise plan.
All right. Those sound like extremely valuable suggestions. I think at this point then we'll close up. Thank you, Dr. Sethi. I hope our residents have enjoyed this. We're also talking about doing a monthly article, or at least we'll do a monthly article in the Villager that will be on the same topic. So folks can look for that as well.
And that came to us, was a suggestion from one of the residents. So we really need your input.
All right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you.